Welcome to another Legacy Warriors podcast. This week, we're talking about LFA 213, which was originally scheduled to be headlined by Chris Makate and Eric Visconti. However, medical issues to Makate has pulled him out of the matchup. There is no replacement as of this moment for Visconti, hence the LFA leaning on one of their veterans, Rafael do Nascimento. He was scheduled to fight on the main card. He's being promoted to the main event alongside the guy he's been supposed to fight this entire time, Arnold Jimenez. So now this brings it down to a 10-fight LFA card. I'll be breaking it all down for you here right now, a little bit earlier than I normally do. Now, I normally drop this on weigh-in day, or at least right after the weigh-in's complete, so we know which fights are actually on the card, because there is often pullouts and cancellations and guys missing weight and fights getting canceled because of that. But I do have a very busy weekend coming up, which includes going out of town for all of next week. I will still have my usual content coming out as usual, but I wanted to get this out as soon as possible before I get too wrapped up that I can't drop it for you guys. So it is a Thursday. This fight card actually takes place after the UFC Abu Dhabi card on Saturday, considering the Abu Dhabi card starts earlier than usual, and then this kicks off, I think, probably around 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern time or something like that. It'll be on Fight Pass. I'm sure the prelims will also be on YouTube. If you want to figure out how I know so much about all these fighters, it's all thanks to the MMA Fight Archive, where we ensure you leave no stone unturned when you're researching these upcoming MMA events, covering nearly 20 different promotions from all over the world, closing in on 5,600 fighter profiles that I've been compiling over the last 2+ years, all with direct links to their past fights, so you know exactly what to expect when they step foot in the cage on the weekends. Find out what we have over 120 subscribers on the service as well. Check the link in the description below. Once again, that is the MMA Fight Archive. 7-day free trial. Did I mention that? Maybe not. I can't remember. Regardless, check it out. All right, let's get right into this bad boy. 10-fight card for this LFA 213 fight card, taking place in California, I believe, Lemoore, California. First fight up, we're going to talk about Jose Avalos coming in at plus 180, going up against Corvin Allen, who comes in at minus 220. Now, Avalos returns to the LFA for the first time in nearly 4 years and has gone 1-2 in his off time. During that time, that 0-2 run that he had with A1 Combat is the last of his pair of fights. He came up short against a very tough Abdikabil Kaldar in December of 2023, and then got submitted in February of 2024 by Johnny Robles. Avalos has a decent all-around mixed martial arts game, decent striking, has some scrambling and grappling ability as well, but it seems like guys that can overpower him or out-muscle him in those spots and out-scramble him will often get the better of him, and I think that's exactly what he's facing this weekend with Corvin Allen, who's looking to bounce back after having his 5-fight winning streak snapped last time around under the LXF banner. Allen has really turned things around from earlier in his career when he was mainly a guy that would headhunt and look to knock his opponents out, but rather now looks to implement the grappling game and smother his opponents, where he's shown decent cardio if he can dictate the pace to go a hard 15 minutes, but we saw his cardio not help him out last time around, where he ended up getting finished in the third round of a matchup where it seemed like his smothering was not translating as much after the 6th and 7th minute, which is when he got hurt, and then it seemed like he was playing defense for the rest of that fight until he got finished. In this matchup against Avalos, I'm expecting Allen to dictate the pace. I think his wrestling and physicality will be too much for Avalos in the spot. I do still have my question marks about Allen's gas tank. You know, Avalos is mediocre enough that he might be able to cause Allen to scramble a little bit more than he's expecting it to, and that might force him to slow down and allow Avalos to start taking over later. So I'm going to pass on this chalky minus 220 line on Allen. I'll still predict him to win this fight by decision. I think he grinds this one out and gets his hand raised on the scorecards. All right, this one is probably the one that I'm looking forward to most on the card. We got Zaro Charles coming in at -115, going up against Benny Orozco, who comes in at -115. So pretty much a pick 'em line on either side here. Now we'll start off on the Charles side of things, who probably had his toughest fight to date last time around against Ulysses Alves back in January, a fight where both guys were able to hurt each other numerous times throughout that matchup, but ultimately it was the cardio advantage, not to mention the slick boxing of Charles, that allowed him to land a little bit more effective damage, which ultimately got the judges to score that fight in his favor by majority decision as well. Normally Charles likes to utilize a smothering grappling approach as well, has some good scrambles, had some good top control, but if he's unable to dictate the pace, he really starts to struggle, and he even was kind of like panic tapping in that lone loss that he has, I believe, under the A1 Combat banner. He's going up against a very tough Benny Orozco, who's one of my favorite prospects on the regional scene because of his just all pressure, all gas style of just constantly moving forward and pushing his opponents to the ringer. I call him a poor man's Merab Avalos feeling, in the fact that he doesn't shoot as many takedowns or have as good a cardio as Dvalishvili, but he does push a high pace, high pressure, loves to get to the wrestling, doesn't really settle for bad positions for too long, does a great job in terms of working out of those bad spots with little movements and then eventually reversing position and then gaining that top control to grind opponents out. He doesn't stop. This guy just keeps going and going and going and breaks most of his opponents. His lone defeat came against Anthony Orozco under the Cage Warriors banner, a fight where he went up a weight class and had some decent success, but it was ultimately the massive size disadvantage that he was at in that matchup that caused him a lot of trouble and allowed Anthony Orozco to hand Orozco his first MMA loss all around. Not just amateur or pro, but leading into that fight, I think Orozco was 2-0, went 5-0 as an amateur. He's now 4-1 as a pro. What do you want to call that? 9-1 overall. High level fighter. In his last matchup, we may have seen a little bit of a cardio issue in that third round, but it seemed like he knew he was up in the first two rounds. He was just biding his time on his back in that third round, and then when he got the energy, he was able to reverse position and ended that fight in a dominant full mount where he was raining down big shots and clearly swinging the round back in his favor. So to get him at -115 in this fight, where I don't think he'll allow Charles to get off on his pace and pressure style, Orozco should win this fight. He should be in the driver's seat for the majority of it. Charles might have some success with his striking advantage, a little bit fast in that realm, maybe even get some takedowns and get some top control, but I don't think the Orozco will settle for bad positions for too long, ultimately getting back in the driver's seat, controlling this matchup, putting his pace, pressure on Charles, grinding this fight out, or getting a third round stoppage as well. So I really like Orozco here, and I love this -115 line. I honestly think it's a bit of a steal. Charles might chin him early, but for the most part, we've seen Orozco with a pretty good durability game, and he's not massively outsized like he was against Anthony Orozco in this matchup, because he is actually fighting at his legit weight class of 155 pounds. So give me Orozco and Orozco by, I'm going to say round 3 finish. All right, next up, we got Naomi Young coming in at +135, going up against Alandria Rosales, who comes in at -165. Now, starting off on the Young side of things, it's been over a year since we've seen her in action, but the last time we did, she came up short against eventual interim LFA champion Cheyenne Bowers. That was a matchup where it seemed like the pace and pressure of Bowers with her physical grappling, pushing Young up against the cage, landing multiple takedowns, was really causing Young a ton of trouble, and that ultimately led to Young slowing down in that second round and Bowers getting that finish. Young has some decent striking skills, and she's kind of physical herself. She trains out of Fusion XL down there in Florida, showcases good striking when she can get into her groove, but we saw that there are fighters that if they're able to just push her against the cage and even drag her to the ground, she will start to slow and wilt. And she might have to deal a lot with that here in the catch wrestling style of Alandria Rosales. Now, Rosales is a fighter that I feel like's kind of been shoved down our throats over the last, well, at least as long as she's been a pro. She's been with the LFA for the last 4 years, but she continues to come up short in some of these matchups where she should end up winning. Even in their last matchup where she lost against a 2-3 opponent who was able to outstrike her in the first round and then out-grapple her and pretty much dominate her in the third round of that matchup with grappling, which is what Rosales should be good at. Rosales is athletic. She's in very good shape. She has some decent cardio, obviously catch wrestling style, BJJ brown belt as well. And I think that's going to favor her in this matchup against Young. And I think that's why she is the favorite in this matchup. But it's hard to build that type of confidence behind her, considering how many times she's come up short, especially in matchups where she should get the win. I think her physicality and grappling will help her immensely here against Young. If Young can match that physicality and keep this fight upright, she might be able to get the better of Rosales in the striking realm. But I think for the most part, Young will be fending off a lot of the takedowns from Rosales, and that will lead to Rosales pretty much winning this matchup, grinding it out up against the cage, landing a few takedowns. Maybe she slaps on a submission, but for the most part, I think we see Rosales win this fight on the scorecards. Next up, we got Gabrielle McComb coming in at -325, going up against Cara Greenwell, who comes in at +250. Now, starting off on the McComb side of things, she is a second-degree BJJ black belt with a ton of hardware to show for it, and she made a successful pro and LFA debut back in January, where she was able to submit her opponent in 3 minutes. It only took about 70 to 75 seconds for her to tinker around in the striking realm before she shot her first takedown, pushed her opponent up against the cage, got the clinch going, and then eventually landed a beautiful trip to get to work with her BJJ, and she quickly found the back of her opponent and forced the submission that night. Her striking, still a bit of a question mark. It seems like she has a high, tight guard, utilizes a good head movement, utilizes decent footwork, but let's be honest, she wants to get fights to the ground as soon as she can so she can get to her advantage and really just stay away from a lot of the resistance she might face in the mixed martial arts realm. She's set up camp in California at the Atos BJJ gym and has been cross-training a lot around there. She even went to Vegas for a bit of this training camp, mixing it up at the UFC PI, as well as the Iridium gym that just opened up within the last year or so, training alongside former UFC champion Alexa Grasso. So she's really taking this thing seriously. She wants to utilize her BJJ as effectively as possible, and she wants to make a name for herself in the mixed martial arts world. Now she's going up against a kind of an experienced amateur MMA fighter. Greenwell turned pro after capturing the Fury FC amateur title. She went 1-1 with Fury as a professional, and then turned her attention to the LFA back in April, where she went up against a former Dana White Contender Series competitor in Leslie Hernandez. That night, Greenwell was able to bully her pretty much up against the cage, land a few takedowns. She ate a nasty elbow that split open her eyebrow in that first round, but she got back to it in the second round, and then from there she was able to land more takedowns, and then eventually worked to a position where she got the tap from Leslie Hernandez in the second round. And that's what it seems Greenwell really likes to do. She likes to utilize her physicality, smother her opponents, look for the BJJ approach, and look to either submit them or grind them out from that top position. And she's strong when she tries to implement it. Now, she'll likely want to utilize that defensively here against the high-level BJJ that's going to be coming back her way in the form of Gabrielle McComb. But does she have the ability to utilize it defensively and utilize a striking heavy game? Again, she has a ton of amateur MMA experience, and that could definitely help her out in this matchup against McComb. But I think it's just a matter of time before the Brazilian gets a hold of Greenwell, drags her to the ground, utilizes her own physicality in those exchanges, and then eventually gets to her BJJ game, where I think she'll get that submission. But it's hard for me to fully get behind the chalk on McComb because of the amateur MMA experience of Greenwell and her physicality. Maybe she can just shut down the BJJ game of McComb by not getting this fight to the ground and just jockeying for a position in the clinch. So I'm going to pass on the chalk, but I do think the Brazilian gets her second pro win. Next up, we got Noah Bay coming in at -1400, going up against Cedric Manhoef, who comes in at +800. Now, Bay made his LFA debut earlier this year, I believe it was, where he was able to pull out a decision victory over fellow striker Cole Laren. And that was a matchup where both guys were hurt badly throughout that matchup. Bay got hurt very badly in the first round and was nearly finished, but managed to grind it out and see the second round where he was able to outpoint Laren. And then in the third round, he hurt Laren very badly and he was in the driver's seat for the rest of the fight to win that fight on the scorecards. But for a guy that came from a kickboxing background and it came from a pretty experienced risen run through his first 6 fights, I was a little bit underwhelmed with his striking defense, but I was impressed with his ability to battle back from adversity to still win that matchup after getting hurt very early in that fight. Now he's going up against Cedric Manhoef, who has taken this fight on short notice and coming in with an 0-1 pro MMA record, but does come from a kickboxing background as well, and that's where we see a lot of his experience in the combat world come from. He has some tight striking, good combinations, good leg kicks as well. And that's why it's kind of making me scratch my head why he is such a massive underdog in this fight. Of course, Bay has more mixed martial arts experience and he might be able to mix it up in the grappling realm. But from the grappling defense I saw from Manhoef in his lone pro MMA fights, it didn't look too bad, especially from a guy that primarily comes from a kickboxing background. With that said, I still think that Bay will mix it up enough here to really cause Manhoef troubles, and I think that will lead to Bay grinding this fight out, outpointing Manhoef. But at minus 1,400, not worth a shot, especially with some of the striking defense issues we've seen from him, even in that recent LFA fight that he had. So I'll still go Bay by decision, but I'd be very careful in terms of laying that type of chalk. We don't lay minus 1,400 around these parts, even minus 1,000. So take that for what you will, but I'm going to go Bay by decision. All right, next up, we got Isaac Thomson coming in at minus 700, going up against Jeremy Henry, who comes in at plus 500. Now, Thomson is looking to continue his winning ways. Last time he was able to bounce back from a second pro defeat against Shaheen Santana. Very close fight, split decision loss. Thomson hurt Santana throughout that matchup, but Santana was able to accrue some solid control time in opportune moments, which I think is why 2 of the judges ended up scoring that fight in his favor. But it was clear that when they were in open space, Thomson was just a superior striker and he was able to land with much more effectiveness. But again, that control of Santana really offset things there. He was able to bounce back against Israel Delgado, hurting him bunch of times throughout that fight, but also mixing in the grappling so that he can get some solid control time. But it was a complete shutout by the time the fight hit the scorecards, which is why he won that fight there. Now he's going up against Jeremy Henry, who's coming into his second LFA fight, and it's only been about a month or so, just over a month since he stepped foot in the cage back at LFA 210, where he went up against another high-level prospect in Dakota Hope and was pretty much outgrinded that entire matchup. Had a few glimpses of success, but for the most part was fighting off of his back against the very physical grappling style of Dakota Hope. He's a very aggressive BJJ specialist, but if you're able to avoid the first couple of submission attempts, it's going to get harder to really catch him in anything, and I think that's the issue that he's going to run into here against Thomson, who's just a cleaner and more technical fighter all around. I think he can stay safe enough to avoid the threat that Henry provides with his aggressive nature, and I think a lot of that will have to do with the technical aspects of Thompson's game, being a great counter striker, being the faster striker as well, but also the ability to change levels and really grind Henry out on the ground if he needs to. I think Thomson is still a very bright prospect. I know he has 2 losses through his pro career thus far, but he's still only 23 years old, firmly entrenched over there at the Team Alpha Male camp. They're going to do great things for this kid, and I think this is a matchup where he'll be able to really just work Henry down and grind this fight out. Yeah, I like Thomson. Minus 700 is usually the limit I would parlay, so I won't hate on anybody looking to parlay Thomson here, but I think this is a very winnable and should be an easy matchup for Isaac Thomson. All right, next up, we got Sheeler Ladd coming in at minus 200, going up against Pedro Lay Jr., who comes in at plus 160. Now, starting off on the Ladd side of things, it's kind of crazy to me that he was the first fight of the night last time around for the LFA, which means that his fight wasn't broadcasted against a very tough Roman Kuzuik, who, from what I heard, was winning that matchup until he started to gas out, and Ladd opened up a nasty cut on Kuzuik's forehead and eventually was able to finish him in the second round of that matchup. But again, LFA, what are we doing? You are the top feeder league to the UFC. You should be showing every one of your matchups, especially if they are a pro fight, and especially if they are again with a notable fighter like Sheila Rad, considering that he is the brother of former UFC fighter Aspen Ladd. He's undefeated throughout his run as an amateur, where he went 10-0, and now he's 2-0 as a pro. So I see that they got him on the main card now, but again, it's more so my issue with LFA not showing their prelims sometimes, which is just mind-boggling to me. Anyway, we know what Ladd brings to the table: heavy wrestling, heavy top pressure, solid pace, great cardio, improving striking, constantly working with a guy like Anthony Fluffy Hernandez. You know what to expect from him. Just wrestling, top pressure, mat returns, more wrestling. And I think he'll be successful with that approach here against Pedro Lay Jr., who made his LFA debut just a month ago when he made short work of his opponent and finished him, I believe, at the ending of the first round. Now, Lay Jr.'s father comes from a combat background as well. I think it was a Taekwondo background, but just runs an MMA gym. Lay Jr., more so a karate specialist, and you can see it in the way that he strikes. He lands straight shots down the pipe with speed. The way that he was able to rock his last opponent as quickly as he did before going to takedowns and really smothering him from that top position. Kind of surprising to see him go for grappling in that fight, but it paid out for him. But in the striking realm, fast, deceiving, nasty kicks as well. But I think he's going to be up against the wrestling here of Ladd, and I don't think that's going to allow Lay Jr. to really get to his striking game. I think Lay Jr. was overlooked in his last matchup because I don't think a lot of people knew what to expect from him. And the only fight footage that we had of him, he looked horrible. But I think that we'll see those bad flaws in his game start to show here, especially against a tough out like Sheila Ladd. So I don't mind Ladd at chalk here at -200. I think he's parlayable. You can play him straight if you want as well. But I think that he grinds out Lay Jr., maybe gets a finish in the second or third round, probably by submission or TKO. I'm thinking maybe ground and pound actually. But I do like Ladd to make this look quite dominant. All right, next up, we got Edmund Kwan coming in at -465, going up against Luau Abushaar, who comes in at +365. Starting off on the Kwan side of things, I did choose to fade him last time around, and it was looking pretty good for Sheldon Struble, who landed a good takedown near the beginning of the first round and kept Kwan on his back the entire time. Unfortunately for Struble, it seemed like he started to slow down and blew his wad in that first round. And in that second round, it seemed like Kwan did a great job in terms of pressuring him, shutting down his takedowns, landing his big shots, and then eventually putting Struble away as Struble was gasping for air, pretty much just rolling over due to exhaustion. Kwan is normally the guy that implements his own smothering grappling approach, mauling opponents once he gets them to the ground, either pulling off submissions or TKOs. He's big, he's strong, his striking still looks a tad robotic, and I think that kind of keeps him away from landing with much power. But he's slowly improving. He's a guy that's largely been alongside, I believe it, I can't remember the gym that he's a part of, but high-level prospect, hasn't suffered a loss through his amateur or pro career, but I think a lot of the opponents that he's been facing outside of Struble kind of were handpicked for him, right? I believe the promotion that he used to fight for kind of was also the gym that he trains at, so they were kind of giving him some favorable matchups, and I think that's why he's looked a lot more dominant than I believe he should earlier on in his career. But he's going up against a tough guy here in Abushaar, who stands at 6'4", which is on the taller side of the lightweight division. Does a great job in terms of utilizing his lankiness with his straight shots down the pipe. He has a very aggressive BJJ game as well. He often finds Frankie Sions, former UFC fighter, in his corner coaching him. He's cross-trained pretty much all over Arizona. I believe most recently he's called the MMA Lab home now, and that's obviously a great coaching staff and a set of training partners that he has there to bring his game to another level. Very aggressive, very good technical striking as well. His only loss came from a flash knockdown, and I think that was something that he could definitely learn from. And he has some decent amateur experience against some solid veterans, or not just veterans, but solid prospects, I should say. So this line, obviously on Kwan at minus 465, makes me scratch my head. I feel like this is a very winnable fight for Abushaar, whether it's him utilizing his distance, his range management, or even if Kwan looks to take him to the ground. I think Abushaar can be very aggressive with his BJJ from his back, maybe pull off a few reversals, but I think it's going to cause Kwan a ton of trouble. And I think Abushaar may even have the better gas tank should this go into deeper water, which could allow him to walk Kwan onto a big strike, a big knee of some sort. Maybe when Kwan is shooting for a takedown or changing levels, Abushaar is more than capable of landing a big shot to put him away. Now, I'm not saying that Abushaar is this crazy high-level regional prospect that's going to just blow him out of the water, but I think that this line is just off. I think a lot of it has to do with the tapo capping in terms of just looking at the Tapology pages and seeing the clean record on Kwan. But when you really dig your teeth into it and take into consideration the advantages that Abushaar could have in this matchup, not to mention the training, the level of training he's been getting recently, the height advantage, the reach advantage, all of that good stuff, this makes him very live to pull off the upset. So I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to go Abushaar. I think Abushaar eventually finishes him, but plus 365 is too good of a line to pass up in this type of a matchup. All right. Co-main event now, where we got the return of Chris Gonzalez, who comes in at minus 225, going up against Jacob Rosales, who comes in at plus 185. Now, Gonzalez, it's been a while since we've seen him compete. It was over 2 years ago where he competed at Bellator 296. I went pretty big on him that night as he took on Tim Wilde, and he had, I believe, I think it was. He only had 2 losses on his record going into that matchup against Gayoti Yamauchi, high-level Bellator fighter from back in the day, and then Usman Nurmagomedov, who would obviously go on to win the lightweight title right after that. But Gonzalez comes from a Greco-Roman wrestling background, was a part of the national team back in 2016, turned to the pro MMA ranks in 2018, joining up with the guys over there at Team Alpha Male. I think they did a great job in terms of evolving him from a wrestler to a complete mixed martial artist, and his striking looks pretty damn good as well. He had some issues with the unorthodox striking style of Tim Wilde. He did manage to land a few takedowns that night, but was unable to get as much control as I expected him to get, which is why Wilde was able to land a little bit more damage and end up winning that fight on the scorecards. But I think Gonzalez still has a ton to offer, right? You're talking about a guy that had very solid victories over guys like Aaron McKenzie and Vladimir Tokov. 7-1-1 for McKenzie, 6-0 for Tokov. So when he beat them, he's beating them at very high confidence levels as well. The only issue that I have is that Gonzalez will be 34, I believe, a few days after this matchup. So he doesn't have too much time to try to make it to the UFC or the next level. But I think a lot of it also had to do with the fact that, the reason he spent 2 years away from action is that nobody would sign up to fight him for the major organizations or the major regional organizations. He was supposed to fight Chris Taco Padilla back last year, but then Padilla signed to the UFC, and that left Gonzalez without an opponent. And I think that's the issue that he's had in terms of struggling to really to stay active. But now he's getting Jacob Rosales, who was able to bounce back into the win column. I believe it was a co-main event spot on one of the last LFA cards where he was able to take down Georgie Ivas and eventually find a submission there in round 1. Rosales comes from a wrestling background, but it seems like he's not all that high level. His last loss came to a guy that was 11-7, who shut down the wrestling, even landed some wrestling of his own, but also the striking advantage of his opponent caused Rosales a lot of issues, bloodied up Rosales over 15 minutes, and then lost that fight on the scorecards. He's also 0-2 on the Contender Series, losing to Jonathan Pierce and Victor Martinez, but he's still just 29, so he might still be making improvements. I just think that we've already seen his ceiling at this point in time, and I think that's going to cause him issues here against Gonzalez. I think Gonzalez probably utilizes his wrestling defensively here and picks apart Rosales on the feet to land a nasty knockout. I could also see him utilizing it offensively and trying to just grind out Rosales, but I think the layoff his eagerness to get back in the cage, his eagerness to be recognized by these top promotions, that's going to cause Gonzalez to go out there and really just throw haymakers that I don't think that Rosales is going to be able to take, and that should lead to Gonzalez finding a big knockout and putting Rosales away. So I love Gonzalez in the spot. I think it's a tailor-made matchup for him, and I'd be surprised if he fumbles the bag. Main event time now. Now, this was supposed to take place before the Chris Gonzalez fight, but after medical issues forced Chris Makate out of his matchup against Eric Visconti, Rafael Dos Nascimento gets the main event honors here, coming in at minus 300, going up against Arnold Jimenez, who comes in at plus 240. Now, Dos Nascimento is now 0-2 with the LFA in terms of title fights. He's fought for the interim title. I can't recall against two a couple fights ago. Jarrell Hodges, I believe it was, came up short in that matchup, and then went up against John Sweeney and ended up coming up short in that matchup as well. But when he's not fighting for titles, he's often getting his hand raised. This is a guy that actually has the lone victory over Marcus McGee, who fights Piotr Jan in the UFC's co-main event this weekend. Dos Nascimento, big power puncher, loves to take command of the cage, loves to stalk his opponents, has some good nasty kicks as well. Likes to mix in some grappling where he sees he has an advantage there. Even pulled off a calf slicer, I believe, in his last win under the LFA banner. Very aggressive, very underrated. Given the path that, if he gets the right path in the LFA, this is definitely a guy that can make it to the UFC or the Contender Series, similar to Lorian Douglas, who, has a loss to Isaac Thomson, ended up finding himself as the LFA champion, now competes on this season of the Contender Series. Dos Nascimento might be able to go the same way. And I think he will be able to show out here against Arnold Jimenez, whose last loss actually came under the LFA banner back in August of 2022, where he came up short against one of Canada's hottest prospects, Tisha Guthro. Since then, he's 4-0. His last 3 wins coming under the LXF banner, which is an underrated regional promotion down there in California, I believe it is. Jimenez mostly looks to take a striking-based approach with slick boxing and good head movement. He has some decent wrestling if he needs it as well, but I think he's going to be on the defensive for the majority of this matchup. I think we'll see Dos Nascimento do a great job in terms of taking control, walking Jimenez down, most likely looking to go to his grappling and taking Jimenez there. But I'd be surprised if Jimenez pulls off the upset here. I think this is a great matchup for Dos Nascimento to just show out in an LFA main event and maybe earn himself another LFA title fight. But I'm going to go Dos Nascimento, and I think he ends up finding the finish probably in the second or third round. There you guys go. LFA 213 broke down for you guys here in the Legacy Warriors podcast. I'll be back later today for the Lockheed Trinity / Lockheed two-step parlay for the UFC Abu Dhabi card. And then tomorrow I'll be scheduling and dropping the prop drop for UFC Abu Dhabi. So make sure you guys stay tuned for all that good stuff. All right. I'll see you guys again later today. Peace.